Have you also asked the respondents about the violence, the bombings, and all this is going on?
We asked, for example, first let's look at the issue of the violence in southern Thailand. Is that a major issue? No, it's way down on the list of concerns of the general population. Unless you ask the Southerners, and then it's very high on the list. But for the general population, it's down there.
It's down south.
Yeah, it's down south. But when you ask them, for example, about was the government right or wrong in using force to end the demonstrations in May of 2010. The majority, I think 55% of the population says, no, that was wrong.
Say that's wrong?
That was wrong. You then ask the question, so should they be prosecuted? No, don't prosecute them. Move on. Should the Reds be prosecuted for terrorism? Society is split. Some say yes, some say no. Should the Yellows be prosecuted for taking over the airport and government house? Again, society is split. Some say yes, some say no. Should politicians who have been found guilty of corruption be prosecuted? Yes. Should parties who violate the election rules be banned? Yes. So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon that they want to take that violence, and it would appear from the data, let's move on from that. We don't want to do that again, but let's move on. Who was responsible for all of the violence? Depends upon who you ask. If you ask those with no color affiliation, the majority of the population, they're very much split. A very slight minority is saying the protesters were responsible. I think up 36%, 33% say the government was responsible, and the rest are saying, I don't know who's responsible. If you ask Reds, it's the government was responsible. If you ask Yellows, it was the protesters who were responsible. So that's one of those questions where the country is split. And there is polarization, basically 50-50 of who's responsible. Was it the protesters who were responsible or the government was responsible? There's no consensus on that. But there is consensus that move on. Don't prosecute the military, the government. Don't prosecute the Yellows. Don't prosecute the Reds.
Just move on.
Move on.
Wow, that's an interesting finding. Even though you said the Reds and the Yellows, they might be the minority of the people in Thailand. Most would say they're not yellow, they're not red. But is this color culture already deep-rooted in Thailand?
I don't think so. It's only been around a few years, and I think that people are beginning to figure out, but I don't believe in all of that. Also, the thing that the data shows very clearly is there's a great deal of factionalism and difference of opinion amongst the Yellows, as well as in the Reds. So what do Reds think? Well, it's very hard to say. What do Yellows believe? Is very hard to say because there are so many factions in each of those groups. And so I think people are stepping back and saying, well, that's that person who says they're yellow, but that disagrees with this person who says they're yellow, or you could change that and say red. And so I think perhaps over the next 5 years we're going to see this color variation begin to get very pastel colored, shall we say, turn pink and turn very, very light yellow or something, I don't know.
Or maybe gone.
Or maybe gone. And a lot of that, we'll see what happens in the next election. For example, we asked the question, how important will a candidate's color be to you in the next election? 3.5% of voting age population is basically saying it's important.
Only 3.5%.
Only 3.5% said it's going to be important to them.
These are like hardcore people, huh?
This is the general population.
No, I mean, 3.5%.
Yeah, 10% of the Reds say it's important. 3%, I think, of the Yellows say it's important. And 2% of the general population is saying it's important. Averages out to 3.5%. You're saying it's important. Whether political parties will notice that particular statistic or not, I don't know. But it would suggest that if you campaign along color lines, it's not going to help you nationally.
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 But
it may in some specific constituencies help you, but nationally it won't help you. It will damage you.
Why damage though?
Because people will react, the voters will react against that. Again, that's what the data suggests. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next election.
What's the attitude in general towards Thai democracy?
It's actually very quite positive. 93% of the population is saying that democracy is the best form of governance, despite the problems that democracy does have. Also, you have a very high percentage, over 90% of the population are basically saying Thai democracy works okay. The suggestion being it needs improvement, but yet it's working from our perspective. Also, we go back to this issue of confidence in the current government, that things are improving, that things are going to be improving in 2011. Or the other issues of the feeling that you have freedom of speech, the feeling that all political parties should be able to come to your area and campaign. These are all very positive attitudes in support of democracy. When you ask them, some people suggest that perhaps we should have an unelected leader to help us through hard times. The vast majority of the population rejects that and say, no, democracy is always best. We don't want an unelected leader helping us. Some people have suggested, another question states, that we should have the best and the brightest. Other people say, no, MPs should be representative of the diversity of Thailand. And again, the majority of the population, in a democratic manner, say, no, we should have representatives who represent the diversity, not just the best and brightest. These are all very positive indicators for democracy.
How's that?
Well, basically, Thais believe in democracy. They believe in those fundamental values of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, with responsibility, that there's freedom to campaign, that there are limits sometimes on freedom. But those are all very positive, and we basically ask the question, what do you think about democracy in Thailand? And they're saying, it's okay. It needs improvement, but it's okay. And it's the best form of governance.
So for the next government, we don't know who that would be. What would be the message out of this finding that the next government should take notice of?
Address the problems of the people, and you'll do fine.
Especially economic issues, everyday life issues.
Economic issues, drugs, corruption. Another major issue, which was quite small when you think about it, only about, I think, 11% mentioned flooding and droughts. But that happened, we took the survey before the major floods that we had last year at the end of 2010. So I think if we'd asked that question a couple months later, a lot more people would have mentioned flood prevention, those types of issues, of being prepared at the local level. There's a perception that maybe the government doesn't listen to us enough, and that the government needs to listen. And in fact, we asked that question. Do you think the government is influenced by what people like me think? And the majority of the population says, no, the government's not listening to me. But the implication is they should listen.
Listen more to the people. That would be the message. Do you think there'll be less color divisions after the election?
The data would suggest yes. There'll be less. But again, times change, so it'll be a year to see whether or not there's
What are the indicators that make you conclude that yes, there should be less division?
When we looked at the data in 2009, we thought that the reds and the yellows were slightly larger in terms of support base. 2010, as I said, comes out to 24% of the population is influenced by one of the colors. After the violence, it would appear that people are more concerned about these types of demonstrations and are going to be more interested in what are the politicians going to offer me? What are their policies going to be? They're going to be more focused on the elections, and that will basically leave the colors with less influence over the next few months, and depending upon who the new government it is and what their policies are. I think the colors are always going to be there. They're never going to disappear because they are interest groups. But to put a positive spin on that, much of what happens in most democracies worldwide is that a lot of critical issues, it's the interest groups that influence the governments on policy-making decisions.
Just now you said MPs are the people that have to improve, according to the survey.
According to the survey.
Yeah, very low level of trust and confidence from the people that they have. But what about all of us as citizens? What can each and every one of us do to improve Thai politics, improve the mood of Thai democracy?
I think that they can basically try to follow politics, ask their MPs, their local politicians, whether it's at the provincial or the Tambon level, ask questions, demand accountability, transparency, be good democratic citizens. And that does not mean just sitting back and waiting for things to happen, people to give you things. For a democracy to really work, citizens have to work at it too. They have to be vigilant, and they have to watch their politicians. That's their role. They have to make suggestions. Sometimes they're going to be wrong, and sometimes they're going to be right. But they should feel that they can express their opinion. As I said, the survey is very positive on that specific issue of people now feel very free to express their opinions on political issues at the local level. So that's beginning to happen, and we just hopefully will continue to see that happen.
Let's hope that Thailand will overcome its color line division soon so that we can move this country forward together in a much more meaningful way. And that is all for this week's Viewpoint. See you next week. สวัสดีค่ะ